G'day and welcome to another episode of Cuppa with a Jesuit. I'm Father Robin Koning, the Provincial Assistant for Vocations.
I'm Jesuit Julian Butler. I'm a Jesuit in formation, and we're joined today by Father Peter Hosking. Father Peter, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Good to see you.
Father Peter, you currently work in a school, but your original sort of professional training was in psychology. Would you tell us how a Jesuit gets into psychology?
Sure. I did my psychology training at La Trobe University in Melbourne, and when I was speaking with the provincial about where he might want to place me in the future, he talked about maybe getting a master's degree and becoming a clinical psychologist. And I did that and really enjoyed the training. I had a wonderful placement at Dandenong Psychiatric Hospital and with forensic psychiatry at Pentridge Prison. And from the psychology, I was fortunate at one uni holidays to volunteer to spend some time with refugees, and my psychology training was really helpful there too.
What is it about, or was it then about the Jesuits that sort of opened up the possibility of psychology? I suppose those who might know Jesuits might be aware that they, whilst being priests or training to be priests, also being religious brothers, do this wide variety of things. Why was that an option on the table for a priest or a trainee priest to go and do a psychology degree?
Yeah, I think the Jesuits have always wanted to put their gifts at the service of the church wherever it's most useful. And that goes way back in our history and the whole vision of Ignatius when we were founded in 1540. Psychology was one of many options, I suppose. We had teachers. In my year, we had 3 lawyers, one of whom was Frank Brennan, and he has kept up with his legal training. I think psychology, it was a way of giving good pastoral care to people and making sure that what we were doing was well done. From pretty early in my time, though, I really liked the way that the principles of psychology could be applied to other things. And for example, I was quite involved in the mid-80s with establishing psychologists for the Peninsular War. And that was using some of the principles of things like relationship counselling and how they might be applied to international relations. But I think I really found a home for the psychology when I started refugee work, and just some of the crises that we were involved in, to have good psychosocial programs and some experience in trauma counselling was really helpful.
And you went on then, your work with refugees, and then you were in East Timor at a very troubled time in its history, wasn't it? I can't recall whether you were directly working as psychology work there, but that was another part of your Jesuit journey.
Yeah, I was very blessed. I'd visited East Timor in the early 90s and met a number of people then, and in fact did a survey of the education and health system at the time. But when the referendum occurred, the United Nations had oversight of it, and they recruited a trauma counsellor, and I was chosen to be that person. So during the lead up to the referendum in 1999, I visited a number of those teams who are working with the local people to get that election in place. And it was a very privileged time to be there when the people were extraordinarily courageous to come out and vote as they did, despite the intimidation by the militias. And then my provincial, Davin Day at the time, was kind enough to support me returning to East Timor to set up the work of Jesuit Refugee Service after that referendum.
What, Father Peter, was it about, or has it been about working with refugees that's drawn you in so much?
I think when you're dealing with people in real need, it's always a great privilege. And some of the camps I was in, they had very, very few resources, but immense needs, and so people had to work together, had to really work out how we were going to feed and then recover from different things. So we were often setting up systems for that, and I really did enjoy that. One of the first places I went to was actually in the Philippines with refugees from Indochina in the late mid-80s. And we worked a lot with training refugees themselves to be paraprofessionals so that they could identify people who had been affected and then put into action some first aid psychology, but also to make good referrals and support people through a process of recovery.
Peter, you grew up knowing Jesuits from a reasonably young age, going to a Jesuit school over there in Adelaide. Obviously, something about your experience of them attracted you to them. Do you want to say something about your journey to the Jesuits yourself?
Yeah, I'm back in Adelaide. I grew up here and went to school at St Ignatius College. I also was in the parish at Norwood, and so I knew Jesuits from a pretty early age. I always found them to be very reflective and people who would consider social issues and issues of spirituality and faith in a very accessible way for me, but a very realistic and sensible way. I probably, as a schoolboy, didn't really think much about being a priest, but in my last year at school, we had a couple of younger Jesuits, scholastics, and I got very friendly with them and found that I could talk to them about issues of faith and reason, or justice and engagement with society, and they were people who were really in touch with the world, but also in touch with God. And that opened up my heart to God and to what God might be asking of me. And I think the religious intuition, that sense of God in my life, has been incredibly important. And that just grew. And as time went on, I think I discerned that maybe God was leading me to the Jesuits. And so I entered, and it's been something that has I've never looked back on. I've really found that it's my absolute home, and been able to do a lot of wonderful things as a result.
As you mentioned, Father Peter, you're back in Adelaide at St Ignatius. So it has been a journey of different roles, from working with refugees to administrative roles within the Jesuits to being back in a school. How has that happened that you were led into education and roles in schools?
I've always tended to say yes to what's been asked of me, and I think in saying yes, you embrace what you might need to learn to make that a good and joyful experience. But it always has been as a result. I wouldn't have thought I would have been a rector of a school. My experience with refugees and other things probably put me more in a different kind of service. But I've loved being a rector, and it's an extraordinary privilege way of being with the young people of today, who will be the leaders of tomorrow. And that's a really generative thing. My influence will die soon enough, but if people, this is a great generation, and I feel personally very hope-filled about where the world will be because of them.
Do you find that openness and interest in those God-sized, God-shaped questions that engaged you as a young man, as a student?
I think a lot of those questions that engage me were year 11 and year 12 questions that are now year 6 and year 7 questions for this generation. They've really, and the internet is a source for great good and potential harm, but they're very aware of issues to do with secularism, with faith and reason, with bioethics, with inclusivity, with gender, with social justice, and they've come to positions about these things at a relatively early age. They're skeptical, so they're always open to new ideas and new information, but they're well informed.
So if you were talking to a young man there at the school or anywhere really who was considering religious life, perhaps considering the Jesuits, what might you put to them? What might you want to say in that conversation?
I think one of the early Jesuits, Jerome Nadal, he described the Jesuit way of proceeding as in the spirit, from the heart, and practically. And I think they're the three things you'd want to line up well. In the Holy Spirit, this is a sense of God being in my heart, God calling me to do something for the world, something that you could do presumably as a married person, but you could also do within a religious order. The Jesuits is a particular kind of community, and that would be really important. From the heart, I think that's about knowing where your heart is and being very sure of not living with a divided heart, but living with a heart that's focused on God and doing something great for the church and people. And practically, there are all sorts of ideologues and all sorts of people who have great ideas, but aren't actually practical. And I think being practical is really, really important to being a good Jesuit.
Father Peter, in thinking about how you talk to a young man, you mentioned the distinctiveness of Jesuit vocation. Of course, any religious life comes with the three vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. You spoke before about having that sense of always saying yes, which I suppose links to obedience. But have you found living those vows, and what are the joys and challenges of living those vows in contemporary life?
Yeah, I think each of them is a really important part of your personality. And if you don't integrate that well, you'll have tensions with them. I think I was very drawn to poverty and to living as simple a life as possible. And in some of those refugee camps where we really had nothing, and the people we were with had so little, it was very free. You're able to live very much based on whatever you had and to share it as well as you could. It's much more complex in Australia where we have too much really, and that leads to too many choices and not sharing the benefits of society well enough. Chastity, it's a thing you've got to love, and you've got to be able to be really open in your relationships and have really good, genuine friendships. But there are very clear boundaries and very clear limits to that. When I was younger, I think there was always a sense of, what if I met someone and fell in love? And there were times when, community life wasn't easy. So you had to make a choice to go to that relationship with Jesus, and even the loneliness that involved, and embrace love again. I think with chastity, the thing that's probably hardest is not having children. But in many ways, being in a school, you have a sense of a very generative vocation. Obedience, I think, can be hard for different personalities. For me, I've actually always believed in serving a purpose greater than myself, and I've always trusted in my superiors, or had a sense that my superiors have been able to talk and dialogue about what I most like to do. But if they said, look, we recognise that this is your choice, but we actually have a need here, I'll embrace the need there and make the best of it that I can. It's not to say it's always easy and that you're, might have other choices, but things will work out depending on the attitude that you give to them more often than not.
Well, Father Peter Hosking, thank you so much for speaking with Father Robin and I today. We're very grateful. Cheers.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Julian. Thank you so much, Robin. See you soon.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Julian.